Hello and good day. This is Dan Arth, and for the next hour, I will be reading from the April 22nd issue of the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the headlines of the Toronto Star: Justice. Victims' families grieve as murderer sentenced. Man who killed two to spend life in prison for public and random shootings in 2022. Article by Jacques Gallant. When Kartik Vasudev was living in India and considering where to travel to pursue his studies, his father asked why he wasn't leaning toward Australia. He smiled and said, "Canada, my dream country." Jitesh Vasudev recalled Tuesday. That answer stays with me. As Kartik's mother, Pooja, tearfully put it, "We sent our son here after great financial struggle, and in just 3 months he was taken from us without fulfilling a single dream." The 21-year-old international student was gunned down by a man he did not know on April 7th, 2022, outside Sherbourne subway station as he made his way to work. Just 2 days after killing Vasudev, Richard Edwin fatally shot 35-year-old Elijah Mapath in the back on a sidewalk in the Dundas Street and Sherbourne Street area shortly after Mapath got off a bus carrying a few bags. Both killings, caught on surveillance footage, sent a chill through the city due to their random and very public nature. On Tuesday, 2 families united in grief came to court to share the impact of their loss at Edwin's sentencing after the 43-year-old man was convicted a day earlier of 2 counts of first-degree murder following a judge-alone trial. Edwin apologized in court for his actions, blaming them on mental illness, even after Superior Court Justice Jane Kelly rejected his claim he was not criminally responsible and instead found he was acting in a rational, methodical, and organized manner. Just before addressing the court, Edwin managed to quickly walk out of the prisoner's box and head straight for the podium in the center of the courtroom next to the Crown attorneys before the court officer finally called him back to speak from the box. "I was having strong delusions at the time, and that's why I took the actions that I did," Edwin said. "No person in the right mind would do something like that on camera. It's a senseless act, but I'm sorry for it, and I want forgiveness as well." A conviction for first-degree murder carries an automatic sentence of life imprisonment with no chance at parole for 25 years, to be served concurrently for multiple convictions. In imposing the mandatory sentence, the judge highlighted the brazen nature of the killings, shooting strangers at random on city streets in broad daylight. "Now he must pay the price," Kelsey said. "These 2 killings have had a chilling effect on our community. I do not think it stretches the bounds of anyone's imagination to think it could have been me." Mapath had come from Trinidad and Tobago to live with his aunt, Monica Gonçalves Mapath, who adopted him after his mother died of breast cancer when he was 12. He learned to play the saxophone and graduated from the University of Toronto with a master's degree in education. "I think about him continuously," Monica said in a victim impact statement filed with the court. "His photos around the house remind me of the love and joy he brought to life." Mapath's sister, Hannah, recalled that despite hardships in his life, he was genuinely deeply happy. Person who dreamed of becoming a pastor and had endless hope for the future. She recalled one instance that showed just how authentic Mapath really was, a man had attempted to rob him, and Mophath told the man all he had to do was ask, and then gave him his last $50 and told this man Jesus loved him. That was who he was at his core, Hannah said in her statement, read by the Crown Attorney. He understood suffering. He had lived enough of it to recognize it in others, and his response was never fear or anger. It was compassion and grace. When Mophath's brother Israel sat in the witness box to deliver his statement, he looked directly at Edwin in the prisoner's box, greeting him. "Hey, Richard, you good?" Edwin put his hand up, replying, "Hi." Israel told him he believes Elijah would have been curious to understand the bigger picture about why Edwin did what he did and would want the best for him. "Richard, I want you to know that there is hope for you even in this position," Israel said, urging him to read the Bible and pray. "My greatest desire for you is that you don't waste your life." Vasudev's parents described Kartik as a bright and hard-working son who was committed to providing for his family and who dreamed of landing a job in digital marketing. His smile was innocent and comforting, and his laughter had a way of bringing everyone together. Jatish said, "He was not only our son, but he was the heart of our family." Pooja said she prays that every parent is given a child like Kartik and to live a long life with them. "What had my son done to deserve this? He was an innocent boy, simply following Google Maps on his way to his part-time job," she said, her voice quivering. "Why was he shot? What did this man gain? Nothing," she said of the killer. "But we lost everything." Vasudev's younger brother, Parth, said over Zoom that he struggles with constant sadness and sleepless nights. "He was not only my elder brother, but my protector, mentor, best friend, my hero, and the person I turned to in every important moment of my life," Parth said. "He guided me like a second parent." The two families embraced in the courtroom after the sentencing was over and emerged from the courthouse together, telling reporters that justice had prevailed. "It is a big relief for us," Jatish said, having traveled to Toronto from India with Pooja, as they did at other points during the trial. "At least we have come to closure for our son's murder." Monica Gonsalves Mophath said she was glad to have met the only other family who could understand what she's been dealing with. Reaching over and touching Pooja's arm, "I wanted to share with them what we went through as well," she said. Our next article from the headlines: Residents call for course correction on island airport plans. Article by Elisha Hashim. Standing on the balcony of her condo overlooking Billy Bishop Airport, Bev Thorpe pauses to let the roar of a landing plane subside. She is used to the blast of sound. She's been living just under 500 meters from the runway since 2010. Nowhere else in the country do you have a community cheek to jowl so close to an airport, she said. "It's very unique. This is the area that would be most affected by the Premier Doug Ford-backed proposal to expand the airport, which could involve more frequent flights, a significant increase in passengers, a runway extension farther into the lake, and the introduction of jets like the private one briefly purchased for the Premier's use. A detailed plan is expected from the Toronto Port Authority in the coming months, and the province is expected to soon table legislation that would try to remove the City of Toronto's role in governing the airport's future. A recent poll found an even split among Torontonians on what should happen at the airport, but clear support for residents having a say in the decision. In the meantime, Thorpe, who is the chair of the Bathurst Quay Neighborhood Association, has been trying to convey what a busier airport would mean for this long-established waterfront community, from noise pollution to safety in the event of an emergency. When the planes aren't taking off or landing, she can hear the thud of basketballs and shrieks of children playing next to the elementary school and daycare in the local community center. The 509 streetcar screeches to a halt at the Irion Quay stop, picking up some of the passengers from the just landed flights. Dogs bark as they are walked through Little Norway Park, where softball and cricket are played in the summer. The park is bordered on one side by Windward Co-op, a home for people with disabilities that is the closest building to the airport, just 200 meters away. Next to it is a 108-unit Toronto community housing building and the Arcadia Artist Co-op, where Joan Prowse has lived since 1989. The peaceful, tiny airport she moved in next to bears little resemblance to what is there today, Prowse said. Since Porter Airlines began operations there in 2006, annual passenger numbers increased from 26,000 a year to 2 million in 2025. In a recent press conference, Ford said he envisions that number reaching 10 million. "We're not saying we don't want an airport," said Prowse, who has fought against allowing jets in the past, "but it keeps growing and growing and growing." She and Thorpe say the Neighborhood Association is worried about increased noise and worse air quality, not just for the residents of Bathurst Quay, but anyone visiting the bustling waterfront, the de facto backyard for thousands of downtown tower dwellers. On weekends, the roads around and leading into the airport terminal are a sea of red lights, Thorpe said. A combination of the airport traffic and downtown events, from Jays games to waterfront festivals. In February, the city began a transportation study on the neighborhood in response to resident concerns about traffic and safety that predate the discussion of airport expansion. Local councillor Ozma Malik will ask council this week to get a preliminary assessment by early summer, alongside a report on the potential impact on planned housing in the port lands. When a major airport expansion was last studied in 2014, consultation reports concluded the increase in airport passengers would require changes to roads and transit. Possible solutions included an underground streetcar loop at the airport terminal with a link to the pedestrian tunnel, extending the pedestrian tunnel underground to the current streetcar stop, building an underpass, or extending Dan Leckie Way south by filling in some of the harbor. Much of the land in the area around the airport terminal is owned by the city, but the city's role in deciding the future of the airport is unclear. Currently, the airport is governed through a tripartite agreement between the federal government, the federally mandated Toronto Port Authority, and the city. Ford has said the province will take over the city's share of the airport land and place in the agreement. A confidential memo to council from the city solicitor obtained by the Star says the city's legal options are hard to assess without seeing the provincial legislation, but there could be a way to challenge the province replacing the city in the tripartite agreement or designating the airport and other waterfront lands as a special economic zone. It is unlikely, however, that the city could oppose the province expropriating or otherwise seizing city-owned airport or waterfront lands. The only arguable issue would be whether compensation is fair, the memo says. Prime Minister Mark Carney has called the idea an interesting vision, as local MPs stress public consultations will be held before a decision is made. And you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Store on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. I know it's causing a lot of concern for residents. We are hearing that, but we are also hearing people who are excited about what a growth trajectory for the airport could look like, said Chai Nguyen, the Liberal MP for Spadina Harbourfront, in a recent interview. I think there are a lot of good questions. We need it to work for everybody. Perhaps Thorpe's favorite spot in her neighborhood is the Toronto Music Garden, a park along the harbor where summer concerts in a small grassy amphitheater go on, even with the intermittent interruption of the planes. It still feels like a hidden gem, though the area gets busier every year, drawn in with new attractions like the restored Canada Malting Silos that now function as an art installation space run by Ontario College of Art and Design University, and the Corlec, an Irish cultural centre, with a rooftop patio opening this summer. Toronto owes itself to have a full public consultation about potentially changing what is going on here, she said. Are we going to choose people, or are we going to choose planes? Our next article, under World News, Trump says U.S. will extend ceasefire at Pakistan's request. From the Associated Press, Islamabad, U.S. President Donald Trump said Tuesday the United States was indefinitely extending its ceasefire with Iran a day before it was to expire, as a new round of peace talks was on hold. The announcement appeared to ease fears that the fighting, which had shaken energy markets and the global economy, would promptly resume. Pakistan had planned to host a second round of talks, but the White House put on hold U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance's planned trip to Islamabad as Iran rebuffed efforts to restart negotiations. Iran had not yet responded to Trump's announcement of the ceasefire extension. Both countries have warned that without a deal, they were prepared to resume fighting. Pakistan leaders, including Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, worked intensively to get both sides to agree to a second round of ceasefire talks, according to two officials. Sharif later thanked Trump for his gracious acceptance of Pakistan's request, saying the ceasefire extension would allow ongoing diplomatic efforts to proceed. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Esmail Baghaei told Iran State TV there has been no final decision on whether to agree to more talks because of unacceptable actions by the U.S., apparently referring to the U.S. blockade of Iranian ports. In a Truth Social post announcing the ceasefire extension, Trump said the U.S. would continue the blockade. As J.D. Vance put on hold a return trip to Islamabad, Pakistan's capital, Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff and son-in-law Jared Kushner were expected in Washington on Tuesday afternoon for consultations about how to proceed, said a U.S. official. The official cautioned Trump could change his mind on negotiating with Iran at any time and declined to predict what would happen. The official said Trump has options short of restarting airstrikes. Before announcing the ceasefire extension, Trump had warned lots of bombs will start going off if there's no agreement before the Wednesday deadline, while Iran's chief negotiator said Tehran has new cards on the battlefield that haven't yet been revealed. And moving on to our next article, under the News World section for the Toronto Star, Japan drops ban on lethal weapons exports. Article by Mary Yamaguchi. Japan scrapped a ban on lethal weapons exports Tuesday, a major change in its post-war pacifist policy as the country seeks to build up its arms industry amid worries over Chinese and North Korean aggression. The approval by Prime Minister Sana Takachi's cabinet of the new guideline clears a final set of hurdles for many arms sales, including of Japanese-developed warships, combat drones, and other weapons. It has been largely welcomed by Japanese defense partners like Australia and attracted interest from Southeast Asia and Europe. U.S. Ambassador to Japan George Glass on X called the move a historic step that will help enhance the defense capabilities between the allies. China criticized the change in policy. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Guo Jiakun said the global community, including China, will resolutely resist Japan's reckless moves toward a new type of militarism. Opponents at home also say the change violates Japan's pacifist constitution and will increase global tensions and threaten the safety of the Japanese people. The new policy will ensure safety for Japan and further contribute to peace and stability in the region and in the international society as the security environment around our country rapidly changes. Chief Cabinet Secretary Minoru Kohara told reporters the government will strategically promote defense equipment transfers to create a security environment that is desirable for Japan and to build up the industrial base that can support fighting resilience. Japan has long prohibited most arms exports under its post-Second World War pacifist constitution. It has made recent changes because of rising global and regional tensions, but exports were limited to 5 areas: rescue, transport, alerts, surveillance, and minesweeping. The new guidelines scrap those limits and allow the export of equipment such as fighter jets, missiles, and destroyers. That's a major change from existing exports such as flak jackets, gas masks, and civilian use vehicles that Japan has sent to Ukraine and intelligence radars sold to the Philippines. For now, such exports will be limited to 17 countries that have signed defense equipment and technology transfer agreements with Japan. Our next article is from the News World section of the Toronto Star. Russian military planes intercepted over Baltic. Article by the Associated Press. NATO intercepted Russian strategic bombers and fighter jets that flew over the Baltic Sea on Monday, a muscular display of air power on the alliance's eastern flank away from the spotlight on the Middle East. French Rafale fighters were deployed from a Lithuanian air base where they are stationed as part of a decades-long NATO air policing effort. The fighters, armed with air-to-air missiles, joined jets from Sweden, Finland, Poland, Denmark, and Romania. They all took to the skies to inspect and keep watch on the Russian flight, the French detachment said. The Russian mission included 2 supersonic Tu-22M3s, as well as about 10 fighters, both Su-30s and Su-35s, that took turns escorting the larger strategic bombers, according to the statement. The Russian Defense Ministry said the long-range bombers' flight was scheduled and occurred in airspace over the neutral waters of the Baltic Sea. The flight took more than 4 hours, the ministry said Monday on Telegram. Moving over to sports. NHL playoffs. Bruins get even with second wind. From the Associated Press. Morgan Geekie bounced in a shot from beyond center as part of Boston's 3-goal second period surge, and the Bruins beat the Buffalo Sabres 4-2 to even their first round playoff series at 1 on Tuesday night. Victor Arvidsson scored twice and Pavel Zacha also scored. David Pastrnak had 2 assists to give him 5 points in the series and tie Bobby Orr for 8th on the Bruins' career playoff list with 92 points. Jeremy Swayman stopped 32 shots, and this time Boston managed to not blow a multi-goal third period lead. Bowen Byram and Peyton Krebs scored a minute and 14 apart for Buffalo to cut Boston's lead to 4-2 with 4 minutes and 52 seconds remaining in regulation before being stymied by Swayman, who stopped the final 8 shots that he faced. The Sabres opened the series with a 4-3 win in which they overcame a 2-0 third period deficit by scoring 4 times in the final 7 minutes and 58 seconds of regulation on Sunday. The series shifts to Boston for Game 3 on Thursday night. Rather than carry over the momentum from Sunday, the Sabres gradually sagged due to spotty goaltending and an anemic power play. Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen finished with 15 saves and was pulled after allowing Arvidsson's second goal 16 seconds into the third period to put Boston up 4-0. Alex Lyon mopped up and stopped all 7 shots he faced. Luukkonen looked shaky on 3 of the 4 goals allowed. Oilers wait for A game. Whether their B game continues to be enough to beat the Anaheim Ducks in the first round of the NHL playoffs, the Edmonton Oilers aren't worried. The Oilers shrugged off their mediocre history in playoff series openers with a 4-3 win over the Anaheim Ducks on Monday, but it came with a they won but. Edmonton won for the first time this season when Connor McDavid did not score. The captain's top line was held off the score sheet, and the Ducks held the NHL's top power play scoreless on 2 chances. Big producing defenseman Evan Bouchard had a quiet -1 game. Edmonton squandered a 2-goal lead after the first period. The Ducks scored twice in the first 5 minutes of the second and led 3-2 in the third. The Oilers host the Ducks in Wednesday's Game 2 at Rogers Place before the series flips to Anaheim's Honda Center for the third game Friday and the fourth on Sunday. Next article, we'll go over to baseball. Savage needs slow start. After a shaky performance with Buffalo, it might be better not to rush him. Article by Mike Wilner. On a chilly night, Trey Yesavage took the Salem Field mound for what was intended to be his final rehab start before rejoining the Blue Jays' starting rotation. The 22-year-old who set postseason records in helping the Jays to the World Series last October was pitching in front of a crowd of dozens. Despite the announced attendance of 3,212, the Buffalo Sabres' second playoff game in 15 years was about to begin down the street. After all, the evening did not go well. Results aren't especially meaningful in a rehab start, but sometimes they tell a story. I wanted to feel healthy, obviously, which I did, Savage said after coming out of the game with 1 out in the third inning. I also wanted to go out there and go 5, 6 innings, whatever it was. Didn't do that. The Jays wanted Yesavage to throw about 75 pitches. He managed 64 before exiting. He issued 4 walks, including to 3 of the last 4 batters he faced. The walk in the first inning, it is what it is, Yesavage said. But there in the third inning, I lost command of the splitter and the heater. Really only the slider was in the strike zone. Just lost everything there. It wasn't as though Yesavage couldn't continue physically, but having thrown 34 pitches in the third inning, only half of which were strikes, and recording only 1 out, it would have been unwise to allow him to keep going no matter how good he felt. The Pennsylvania native was his own worst enemy Tuesday. It was all self-inflicted damage, he said. Beyond the command issues, Yesavage didn't make things easy on himself by throwing away a chance to get out of the first inning having put up a 0. With a runner on first base and 2 out, 4-year big leaguer Nolan Jones hit a weak tapper back to the mound. Yesavage knocked it down and had plenty of time to recover, but threw the ball past first baseman Charles McAdoo and down the right field line, allowing the runner to score and Jones to go all the way to third. The mishap only cost him 4 extra pitches before getting out of the inning, but it made him angry. Yasevich tried to throw the heater through the catcher's chest on the next pitch. It was a strike at 95.4 miles per hour, his second hardest delivery of the night. The right-hander with the ridiculous release point averaged 94.3 miles per hour on his fastball Tuesday, similar to the 94.7 he averaged with the Jays last season. Physically, I feel great, he said. I feel normal, so I'm happy about that. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio reading service. In the sports section, Scepters overtime loss could mean the end. Toronto's chances of taking final playoff spot now slim, while New York eliminated despite win. Article by Kevin McRan. The Scepters' playoff hopes are alive, though perhaps not for long, after they dropped a 1-0 overtime decision to the New York Sirens on Tuesday. It was the worst possible outcome for two teams that came into the game with hopes of catching the Ottawa Charge for the PWHL's fourth and final playoff spot. The Sirens needed the full 3 points for a regulation win to do so. They did not get it. The Scepters remain alive, but they wanted more than the single point that comes with an overtime loss. It sucks, Scepters forward Daryl Watts said. Our destiny was in our hands, and we failed. Everybody cross your fingers for tomorrow, and hopefully we'll have a battle on Ontario on Saturday, goaltender Reagan Kirk said. The Scepters have 38 points, one back of the Charge. They will await the result of Ottawa's game Wednesday night against Boston before knowing the significance of Saturday's season finale in the nation's capital. A regulation win by Ottawa would make the finale moot. With the sold-out Coca-Cola Coliseum in fun mode, fans were chanting, "We want the playoffs." The Scepters had a chance to win the game before overtime. Needing to win in regulation, the Sirens pulled their goalie with 1:21 left in the third period. The Scepters went on a rush but put themselves offside. The Sirens won the ensuing faceoff and played the rest of the period in the Scepters' end, but the score 0-0 in regulation ended New York's playoff hopes. New York's Allison Simpson finally solved Kirk 2:42 in the extra period. Kirk faced 33 shots. The Scepters managed 21. And staying in sports, NFL draft, Mendoza embraces marathon. Expected top pick has met with the Raiders, Jets, Cardinals, and Browns. Article by Michael Marot. Indianapolis. Some NFL draft prospects get worn out by the league's marathon draft process. Fernando Mendoza embraced it. He did the interviews, made the rounds, and firmed up his draft night plans with his trademark smile and positive attitude. Now all he can do is wait to see what happens Thursday night. The Heisman Trophy winning quarterback, an overwhelming favorite to be taken number one in the NFL, said he has enjoyed each step along the path as he anticipates starting the next chapter of his football journey, whether it's in Las Vegas backing up Kirk Cousins or going to some other team. It's been long, but it's been great because a job interview usually is a couple of weeks or even a single day in the office. But this job interview has been a couple of months, Mendoza said. The teams know everything about you, and that's been my favorite part. They can peel back the layers and see the true you. It's been great to test my football IQ, my football knowledge. The Raiders, or any of the other three teams he spoke to, likely found little to quibble with. While he has met 3 times with Las Vegas officials since leading the Indiana Hoosiers to their first national title in mid-January, the Boston-born Mendoza also met his boyhood favorite Raiders minority owner Tom Brady, who got an in-person look at Mendoza at the championship game. He has also spoken with the New York Jets, Arizona, and Cleveland, who hold the 2nd, 3rd, and 6th picks and could be in the market for a new franchise quarterback, but he also denied suggestions he's been studying a Las Vegas playbook, explaining the rumors started after he sought help from former NFL quarterback and quarterbacks coach Brian Griese to get a head start on some elements of what he expects to see wherever he lands. Mendoza and Griese attended the same Miami high school, Christopher Columbus, decades apart. We knew each other, and I reached out to him and said, "Hey, I've got to get ready for this. I don't care what my pro day looks like. I just want to help my guys on pro day, and I want to be the best quarterback come September. Can you help me with this?" Mendoza said. He played in the West Coast offense, so we were able to install a lot of West Coast concepts, just general concepts, and under center concepts every single team runs. But Mendoza also wants to keep Thursday night low key. Instead of traveling to Pittsburgh, where the draft will be held, he wants to be with those who helped him reach this point. They'll be surrounding him in Miami. I've done so much traveling this year. It's a lot easier for my mom, who is battling multiple sclerosis, and her health is at the forefront, Mendoza said. We need to hop on a plane the next day for whatever team drafts me, and to be there with the village that's poured into me, friends, families, coaches, mentors, to be there with all of them and to share the start of this NFL journey. It's going to create the best memory for our family. And moving over to golf in the sports section of the Toronto Star, PGA Tour will skip Hawaii. The PGA Tour will not be in Hawaii in 2027 for the first time in 56 years as it moves toward a revamped schedule. The Century was canceled last January on drought-stricken Maui when the grass on the plantation course at Kapalua was dying due to restrictions brought on by a dispute over the water delivery system. The Sony Open in Oahu, which followed the Century, was in the final year of its sponsorship. Moving over to the business section, Europe may cancel flights over summer. Airlines, airports on continent making adjustments in face of fuel crisis. Article by Anastasia Blasser. Canadian travelers with plans to visit Europe this summer might have to put their vacation plans on hold as experts warn of flight cancellations amid an impending fuel shortage on the continent. The warning comes after the head of the International Energy Agency, IEA, said Thursday Europe has maybe 6 weeks or so of jet fuel remaining, with supply disruptions linked to the ongoing war between the United States and Iran. Early signs of strain are already emerging, with airlines adjusting routes and airports restricting flights, raising concerns about broader disruptions during the summer travel season. If there's a shortage, the only alternative is to increase prices or just cut back on the number of flights, said Roger McKnight, chief petroleum strategist at energy consultant Enpro. McKnight said the pressure on Europe's fuel supply is already building, tied to disruptions in shipments through the Strait of Hormuz that typically feed key supply hubs in northwestern Europe. Much of the replacement supply is expected to come from the United States, but McKnight said demand is high and competition is driving up prices, including Canada. In Canada, jet fuel is part of the same category as diesel, McKnight added, and shortages affect both, with planes requiring tens of thousands of liters per flight. Airlines are left with limited options. The IEA, International Energy Agency, noted Europe is particularly vulnerable because 75% of its supply of jet fuel is imported from the Middle East, it noted in an oil market report published Thursday. The loss of Middle East jet fuel exports has thrown a proverbial wrench into the inner workings of the aviation fuel markets, the report said, adding that the region is now turning to international markets to replace the lost supply, and the impact is expected to be concentrated in the second quarter of 2026. Getting from Canada to Europe is not going to be a problem, explained former Air Canada executive and aviation lecturer at McGill University, John Graydick. The problem might arise when you're returning from Europe. You may be leaving from an airport that may have restrictions because they're rationing fuel. Graydick said some European countries have already begun implementing fuel restrictions, starting with Italy, and that other countries could follow in the coming weeks as supplies tighten. The 6-week number that was given by the IEA really was running Europe dry, Graydick said. There will be areas in Western Europe that may run out earlier in the next 3 to 4 weeks. Martin Firestone, a travel insurance broker, said he is hearing concerns from clients about both rising costs and the possibility of disruptions. The big question out there these days is cancellation and interruption, he said, referring to the potential for flights to be canceled or rescheduled due to fuel shortages. Firestone said travelers are also facing higher prices, with fuel surcharges expected to increase significantly. We're talking hundreds and hundreds of dollars, he said. Airlines in Canada have begun responding to higher fuel costs, even as they say supply remains stable domestically. Air Canada announced it will suspend several routes in the coming months, citing a sharp increase in jet fuel prices, which the airline said have doubled since late February. Flights from Toronto and Montreal to New York's John F. Kennedy International Airport will be paused starting June 1st and are expected to resume in late October. The airline will continue service to nearby LaGuardia Airport and Newark Liberty International Airport. Additional suspensions include routes between Toronto and Yellowknife at the end of August, Fort McMurray and Vancouver in late May, and Toronto and Salt Lake City on June 30th, with that route not expected to return until 2027. A planned route between Montreal and Guadalajara has also been canceled before launch. Air Canada said the suspended routes amount to about 1% of its planned capacity. The airline added that affected passengers will be contacted with alternative travel options. WestJet said it has not made changes due to fuel availability, but has adjusted some routes, consolidated flights, and added a temporary $60 surcharge on certain bookings due to rising fuel prices. The airline reduced capacity by about 1% in April, 3% in May, and 5.5% in June, primarily affecting domestic routes. Air Transat and Porter Airlines said they have not reduced or canceled flights due to fuel constraints, but are monitoring the global fuel situation. Firestone added that flight schedules could be consolidated if fuel availability becomes more limited, which could affect travelers with fixed plans. If they don't get to that destination on that day, you can go on and on about what the domino effect will be, he said, pointing to non-refundable bookings such as cruises or accommodations. Firestone said travel insurance may help offset some financial losses, but added that travelers should confirm whether policies cover disruptions linked to war or fuel shortages. Graydick said the situation remains uncertain with fuel shipments from other regions expected to take several weeks to arrive. It is a very fluid situation, he said. The crystal ball is pretty clouded today. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the business section, Apple engineer ready for the crunch. After decades working with hardware, incoming CEO will be forced out of his comfort zone. Article by Kelvin Chan. London. Apple's next CEO, John Tiernes, is a company veteran who rose through the iPhone maker's hardware engineering ranks, but until now has maintained a low profile. Tiernes will take over as chief executive in September for Tim Cook, who turned Apple into a $4 trillion tech colossus during his 15-year run after the death of co-founder Steve Jobs. Tiernes faces challenges that will force him to step out of his comfort zone in hardware engineering. Beyond finding ways to keep Apple competitive in the artificial intelligence race, he will need to navigate supply chain questions and relationships with figures like U.S. President Donald Trump, who offered public praise for his predecessor Tuesday. Tiernes, 50, has spent almost his entire career with Apple. He joined the company 25 years ago and has spent the past 5 years overseeing the engineering that underlies the iPhone, iPad, and Mac. It made him the prime contender to succeed Cook, who on Monday, when Apple announced the change in leadership, hailed Tiernes as, without question, the right person to lead Apple into the future. Tiernes worked on some of Apple's signature products under Cook, including the Apple Watch, AirPods, and Apple Vision Pro. He was also involved in the MacBook Neo, arguably one of the most disruptive products that Apple has released in a while, said Ben Wood, chief analyst at CCS Insight. This mentorship will undoubtedly ensure a smooth transition, and initially, I expect very few changes to the company's strategy, Wood said. The appointment appeared to be carefully timed following Apple's 50th anniversary celebrations and ahead of its annual WWDC Developers Conference in June. The change also arrives at a pivotal time for the Cupertino, California company. While Cook led Apple through an iPhone-fueled era of prosperity, Apple has fallen behind in the AI race. Apple has stumbled in its efforts to deliver new features built on AI, as was promised nearly 2 years ago. The challenge for the new CEO is really to make sure Apple is able to crack AI as the new user interface and reinvent human-machine interaction, Forrester research analyst Thomas Hewson said. Wood says attention at WWDC will be on the new CEO's AI strategy and what the company will do next year after turning earlier this year to Google, an early leader in the AI race, to help make the iPhone's virtual assistant Siri more conversational and versatile. A big strategic question is how far Apple will invest in building its own AI platform versus relying on other companies' models and platforms, Wood said. Apple also faces a turbulent market amid geopolitical uncertainty, Wood said. The consumer electronics industry faces a perfect storm, with memory chip shortages and the war in the Middle East having widespread implications for consumer confidence. Apple will also need to decide how much it wants to continue its deep reliance on China for manufacturing, he said. Being Apple CEO will also require soft skills, including developing relationships with important figures. Cook cultivated ties with Trump as he navigated the company through business challenges, including Trump's trade and tariff war targeting countries in Asia, where Apple has extensive manufacturing supply chains. Trump noted his relationship with Cook in a social media post on Tuesday morning, writing, "It began with a phone call at the beginning of his first term when Cook asked for help with a fairly large problem that only I, as president, could fix. That was the beginning of a long and very nice relationship," Trump said. Tiernes is not well known outside of the Apple universe. He joined the company in July 2001, according to his LinkedIn profile, which does not have any posts. Before joining Apple, he spent 4 years as a mechanical engineer at Virtual Research Systems. He graduated in 1997 from the University of Pennsylvania, where he was a member of the swim team, and for his senior project developed a mechanical feeding arm for quadriplegics controlled by head movements. In a 2024 commencement speech to the university's engineering school, Tiernes said he was intimidated when he first started working at Apple and wasn't sure he belonged. He learned to always assume you're as smart as anyone else in the room, but never assume you know as much as they do. There will always be new skills to master and new people to learn from. Tierney said in Apple's announcement that he was humbled to step into this role, and I promise to lead with the values and vision that have come to define this special place for a half a century. Our next article in the business section, Yelp using AI to help users navigate reviews. Article by Michael Leitke. San Francisco online review aggregator Yelp wants to harness artificial intelligence to make it easier for users to find information curated by other people. Although Yelp's users have always been able to dive into its reservoir of 330 million local business reviews, they sometimes find themselves drowning in a sea of commentary from other people about restaurants, doctors, plumbers, roofers, and a smorgasbord of other merchants, a problem the new chatbot assistant is designed to solve. For instance, if a user asks Yelp's new assistant for a good place to get coffee with a dog, the app will show recommendations alongside relevant reviews. This chatbot can really understand 500 reviews in a second, whereas a consumer might say, well, I read the first 5 reviews, so I guess that's good enough, said Yelp CEO Jeremy Stoppelman, who co-founded the company 22 years ago. Analyzing and explaining vast amounts of information in an easily digestible summary is something other leading chatbots such as OpenAI's ChatGPT, Anthropic's Claude, Perplexity's Answer Engine, and Google's AI Overviews already have been doing. Yelp believes its chatbot will stand out by pointing to the reviews that led to its recommendations and conclusions. The San Francisco-based company decided to create an AI chatbot that shows the evidence underlying its findings after a survey found most consumers worry the technology provides misinformation or fabrications. People want AI chatbots to be transparent about where they are getting the data from. They want to see the reviews alongside the results when they're doing local search, said Craig Saldanha, Yelp's chief product officer. So we are trying to make sure the human connections stay front and center while AI handles all the drudgery of making those connections. Yelp has been looking for a spark during an AI boom that has more than doubled the value of the tech-driven NASDAQ Composite Index, while its stock price is stuck at roughly the same level as the end of 2022, shortly after OpenAI released ChatGPT. Although Yelp business reviews have always been popular among consumers looking for recommendations about places to eat and shop, the company hasn't been able to overcome people's almost reflexive habit of turning to Google when they're searching for almost anything. Google was already synonymous with search by the time Stoppelman and Russell Simmons launched Yelp in 2004, but its results about local businesses often were either inadequate or inaccurate. To help fill the void, Google signed a 2-year licensing agreement to gain access to Yelp's reviews. But the partnership fell apart when Google began to summarize various information about various topics in a way that gave consumers less reason to click on links that sent them to other sites. That phenomenon has hurt Yelp and other free online services that make most of their money from advertising. Yelp is pursuing its own antitrust lawsuit against Google in a case scheduled for May 2028 trial. And our final article today in business, groceries. High fuel prices driving up costs of shipping to north. Increases mean hikes on fresh produce as air freight becomes more expensive. Article by Ratika Dubai. Whether it's Florida oranges, Colombian coffee, or even homegrown items from another province, food has often traveled a long way before it reaches grocery stores in Canada. The supply chain gets even longer for communities in the far north. Typically, groceries are loaded onto a truck and taken to a launch point in cities like Ottawa or Winnipeg. They're then flown or shipped by sea to finally reach the shelves of remote northern grocery stores. It's an expensive journey, By the time groceries reach northern communities, the added transport costs mean items are priced significantly higher than what most Canadians pay at the grocery store, and even more for fresh and perishable produce. Now, as another bout of food inflation looms due to high oil and gas prices, grocers in the north aren't just facing price hikes from suppliers, but also the skyrocketing fuel costs needed to ship them up north. The vast majority of all the perishable food is coming in by air freight, said Nicholas Lee, an economics professor at the Toronto Metropolitan University. That's a substantial share of food prices, he said. Air freight costs are usually measured by weight, Lee explained. That disproportionately affects food relatively low in price for its weight, such as fruits, vegetables, and milk. Last year, the average cost of the food basket comprising 24 items at a Nunavut grocery store was $198.75, compared with the same basket of items in Ottawa at $132.44, according to a food survey report by the Nunavut government. Jet fuel prices have roughly doubled since Iran blocked tanker traffic through the narrow waterway of the Strait of Hormuz. The route has been virtually cut off after the U.S. and Israel began their attacks on Iran in late February. As the fate of the strait remains contested amid negotiations, oil prices have continued their upward trajectory, which drives gas and diesel prices higher as well. The Northwest Company, which runs retail banners including Giant Tiger, North Mart, and Northern, is seeing fuel surcharges of 20 to 50 cents per pound on air freight for cargo going to northern provinces and territories. That quickly adds up, said Mike Beaulieu, Vice President of Canadian store operations. A 4-liter jug of milk weighs 10 pounds, which means a $2 to $5 cost increase for a single unit that most Canadians would take for granted as being pretty price stable even in this high inflation environment. He said, the Northwest Company has about 165 stores across northern Canada, serving more than 125 communities. Most of them serve as community general stores with primary focus on groceries, but also carry an assortment of apparel, housewares, and even big ticket items such as ski-doos and boats. So far, Northwest hasn't passed on price increases to its customers on essentials such as milk, bread, eggs, baby formula, and diapers, Beaulieu said, but the cost of non-essentials such as beverages and salty snacks has gone up. There are some costs already flowing through. It's unavoidable, Beaulieu said, adding there's more likely to come. And you've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the April 22nd issue of the Toronto Star. Your reader has been Dan Arth, and I thank you for listening.